it with people after
There
that.
we go.
There we go. It's going.
All right. Well, that sounds good then. Actually, let me turn off my video if I can figure out how to, you know what? Never mind, because I can't find the button for it anymore. Oh, here it is. I'm in a relatively low bandwidth connection, so I don't want to use up all my downstream by pushing things out. The talk I want to give is about LogStream custom commands. I'm going to preface this whole talk with, like, this is not for people who already know how to do them. This is really for people who do not, because I barely know how to do them myself. So who am I and why should you listen to me? I cannot cooperate my own screen. There it goes. So as mentioned, I'm Rich Mahlerwein. Yep, you can find me in various places at various times. You can Google it. I've been a member of the Splunk Trust since it got started, which reminds me much of Rachel. Hi. But also speaking of that, if you Google, you might find my daughter Evelyn as well. She gave a talk at one of the Splunk B-sides, I think in 2018 or 2017 in DC on doing regular expressions. So that was a lot of fun, and you can find her as well out there. She's since turned into an actual teenage girl and lost a lot of interest in that stuff, but you know, it is what it is. I hope to get her back. So I am a Cribl noob. I've been working with it for a couple of months now on mostly XPAC's urging. He's a great person to get you started in it, mainly by hounding you until you try it. I'm also not a JavaScript expert. So to answer the second part, maybe you shouldn't actually listen to me anyway. I don't always know what I'm doing. So anyway, but I hope this works out well enough for you. So I do have a couple of quick disclaimers. This is all wrong, and there's probably typos. And if it makes your system self-destruct, it's not my fault. And the biggest one is probably take this all with a grain of salt and check it on your own, because again, I don't know what I'm doing. I just made this stuff up as I went because I had a need and I filled it. So the problem here, as I see it, is the Cribl docs, or at least they have a blog. There's a couple of other things out there that give some pretty good examples for filtering commands, which those either let an event pass through or they drop the event, depending on some criteria or another. So that's relatively easy to follow. You don't have to be a JavaScript expert. You could just be pretty much a noob at JavaScript and figure those out, because they're pretty straightforward and easy. But unfortunately, the augmentation example dives straight into stuff that I think JavaScript experts probably find second nature, but I don't. I did not at all. I don't know what a promise is. I mean, I have a vague idea. I couldn't read half the code. It was convoluted and just, it was too big of a jump from the simple filtering ones that I think we could follow to the augmentation ones, but I just couldn't. So I figured it out in other ways. So what did I need to do this for? Well, what I found, I'm really trying to rebuild some of our other product in a Splunk product into Cribl. It's slow work, you know, just fiddling around with it in off hours and, you know, as I get time. But one of the big things we had was this product sends you IPs in signed integers. And those are, I mean, they're wonderful. You know, it's a big number. You can treat it as such, but it's really difficult when you're kind of used to the dotted quad notation and things like that. So
watch your shoes, don't touch the bottom. No.
So I certainly didn't mind looking up on the internet the actual algorithm to do the conversion. And I mean, it's easy to find. And again, another note here, if you do this kind of stuff yourself, make sure you double check it. Most things like this are going to be relatively straightforward to figure out. It's just some modulus math and things like that. So it's easy enough to double check that it's not going to send all your private data to China, but you know, you should double check that stuff. So let's jump right in then. The file and file locations, I will not belabor this point a whole lot because the blog, which I linked to at the end of this, actually outlines it pretty well. I had no problems figuring it out, so you won't either. There are two files involved though. The index.js is the actual script or command you're building, and then a conf.schema.json, which is the configuration file. And I'll show you both of those. So let me start with the absolute simplest thing I could think of to do, which is to just create a field, and set it to a static value. And this was the code I found was about the minimum I could do, but that worked. So the new field name is my output field, and it's set to monkey nose. I have no idea why I picked that. Just some nonsense thing I came up with. Now, because we're doing static fields to a static value, we didn't even need a conf.schema.json. We'll get into that in a little bit, but it would be a quick pass through that too as we come across it. So now that we can create a field with a value, the next step was to figure out how to create or how to make that field be dynamically named. So I jumped straight into this. I found some other samples. I just stole it right out of the blog and pasted that in and figured out this is the part that does that. You can see that I added it in yellow, so it's a little easier. But now that we have a configuration required, we now have to build our conf.schema.json file. Turns out though, that's pretty simple. Poof, that's the entirety of it at this point. We just create a field out field, which has got a title, description, and a type. And that's defined up here. Let me turn on my little laser pointer. Oh, a pen, whatever. That's defined up here. We're grabbing it out of the conf file, and then we tell it to use it that way. And then here's where we put the file. All right, or the field. So now that we have an output field name, we should be able to extend this to do an input field name and make that dynamic just about as easily. And as you can see, it is. And I'll have all of this code available. You can download it. You can just ask me. You can download the presentation. There's really nothing amazing in here, but you know, it's certainly easy enough to follow along if you need to again. And again, if you're an expert and you know a better way, well, you should post a better blog. So by having the input and output field, we also need to add this to our conf.schema.json file. And as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. We just added in the new piece. And now just to prove it worked, we have a screenshot. Our input field and our output field both show up. And the descriptions are what shows up if you hover over the question mark. All right. So the last thing, we have an input, we have an output, and we have a way to assign one to the other. But now we just need to do different work. So really, this is about the skeleton I think you should be presented with mostly, which is just to create a temporary value and then do work to it, right? We read in the value out of our event. We do something to it, in this case, divide by 3, which is a pretty dumb example, but it's fine. And then we just assign it to an output field and return the event. By the way, this is very important. It doesn't work right if you don't do that. Seems simple, but so as we've seen, we can now take inputs, outputs, and do work to them. So let's go ahead and finish my particular problem with a solution. And here's our modular math and things like that. It's all stuff that's pretty easy to get your head around, assuming you know it. And if you don't, you just take it on faith that it doesn't send your private data to China. But so what we've got is our destination. In this case, I have set it up to do the dest IP address, which is this number, and it converts to that. And you can double check. You can actually type those into. There are a number of converters online that let you double check these kinds of things. So as I said, I'll make sure all of this stuff is available. It should be relatively easy to follow, kind of like a mini tutorial. And again, if you already know JavaScript fairly well, this stuff, you probably don't need hardly any of this. The one little skeleton might be useful just to plug your own stuff in without having to fight with the structure around it. But really, you're not going to need it a whole lot because you're already going to know what to do. So let's go on to a couple of final thoughts. Especially for the people who are new and trying to write their first custom command, which is, the first thing is take it one step at a time. Start with something known, simple, and easy that you can get working. Let it augment your events, and then go from there, right? And along with that, keep track of what you're doing. Either back it up each time, keep a copy of it in Notepad++ or Sublime or somewhere, check it into Git, check it into SVN, which I prefer over Git because it's less confusing. Whatever you want to do, anything you need to do to make sure that you can like figure out your path through this and always back up to a known good example. When in doubt, you can search the interwebs for JavaScript plus your problem. Sometimes it will take some hunting or going through some quick tutorials to find the right places to be able to actually get the help you need. But you can also ask in the community chat there. I'm sure people will be able to help you answer that. There is a blog, and it actually was really good. It gave me the start at doing what I needed to do. There was just that gap between the easy and simple filtering example and the much more complex not filtering example. If you'd like, feel free to go to that page, search for the phrase "to keep it simple," and then read through the rest of the example. It's it's lots of fun. And my last final thought is, don't use PowerPoint for code. I have found it's terrible. It doesn't like tabs. It doesn't like spaces. It doesn't do anything well. It's just horrible to use. So that is the end of my slideshow.
Thank you so much. Are you preparing to answer questions? Is that
I can answer questions. They're terrible. I mean, yeah. Here, in fact, I can even show you that it does really work. But I can, if anybody has any questions, they can feel free. I just got to find the right tab here. Oh, here's my LogStream. Oh, better log in again. In fact, I have a whole sling of them in here. Not in this pipeline, in this pipeline, and this 6. So there's a whole bunch where I do the exact same thing. It's my function. We will preview here and out, and you'll see that dest IP address or whatever. Let's find one. Dest IP address IPv4. See, works. In fact, that's the exact example I was taking screenshots in. Forge IPv. There it is. So, were there any questions that don't involve heckling?
That's kind of an important distinction with this group. We have one in the chat, which from Ed Bailey. How do you distribute the command to your workers? Can you do it through Cribl or externally using Ansible? That's
a really good question. It is just I have no idea the actual answer, but my guess is it's just a handful of, here, I'll start my video so you can see my hands up in the air. My guess is it's just a handful of files on the file system, so I'm sure they can be distributed somehow. That would be a good question to ask in the community Slack.
Or is anyone else here have a clue about this? And don't forget to unmute yourself.
Somebody here must know.
As Rick mentioned, sorry for interrupting, Christoph here speaking. It is a bunch of files which can be transferred via Ansible. I don't know that there is a mechanism to transport it to the workers using Cribl itself. I'm not aware of that one. So I've written a custom command myself to transform from JSON to CSV, and it's basically 3 files which had to be placed on disk.
Is it possible to use the knowledge library?
Yeah, so the files that you have are just in your local configuration. And so if you're in like a distributed environment, and if you drop them on to like into like a worker groups configuration, it should show up in like the Git stuff, and you can commit it and then deploy from there.
Hey, Nick, you should introduce yourself. What do you do at Cribl?
I'm Nick. I'm a principal software engineer here at Cribl. I've been here for about 2 years.
2 years? That's forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
I know
Nick knows what he's
some
talking
things.
Some things.
Some things.
I would like to say, I did want to say something that I forgot to mention, which is, honestly, I have only found the one case where I needed an actual custom function. I mean, the eval and other things that are already built into Cribl can do almost anything you need. It was a struggle to find something that needed it. But then the moment you do need a custom function, what do? You write one. So, but I did want to just mention that they've already got most of the functionality you'd need built in. I probably could have even faked up an eval to do that thing, but it would have been pretty hairy.
Yeah, and we actually, all of the functions we ship are actually in the default folder. So you can see, if you wanted to write your own, you can also kind of look at the ones we've already written to kind of gather inspiration. It's all under default. I think it's just default functions or something.
Very cool.
It's less of a question for Rick. Thanks a lot for sharing and kicking it off with your first presentation in a user group. It's more of a discussion point of you now wrote a function somebody else might need, and it's in point of sharing, because I know, seeing Nick now on the screen, he's a contributor of the Cribl content as well on GitHub. And I'm wondering about how to share the different generated functions within the community.
Yeah, so maybe someone else has a better answer than me.
I was going to say, I don't have an answer.
Well,
I was gonna...
Go Cribl.com.
Well, here's another Nick to jump in. Hi, everybody. I've been at Cribl much shorter period of time than the first Nick. I've been here for about a week, but I come from a long line of Splunk experience and things like that. I think I will be working in the product area, so going forward. So the question I have, because this is something we've been talking about a lot internally, is how would you like to share this content, right? What is the best mechanism for the community working together? Because we very much do have our sights on this model of collaboration, but I think it'd be a great time to hear what would be best for everybody here.
Well, knowing the background of the majority in the chat and seeing some familiar names related to Splunk, the first idea I got in mind is similar to Splunk Base, basically. To share your configuration files via an official web page or something like that.
Yeah, but that hasn't worked out so well with Splunk. I mean, look at some of the half-assed TAs. You haven't got the vendor buy-in. Some of the better TAs are built by Splunk, and some of the worst TAs are built by Splunk.
Maintenance will be the issue for sure.
At least, I don't know, Git's got some advantages, but it's still essentially Splunk base. If you want to get down to it, but at least these guys could control what gets released, but that's going to eat up manpower for them to review it and decide, yea, verily, this is safe or not. I don't have an answer, but that's just the stuff I see,
Definitely see your point there. Well, because there are tons of TAs not worth even mentioning on Splunk base.
Try converting one of those bad ones to a Cribl pipeline.
Well, we are getting ready to launch at some point in the coming year our version of Splunk Answers, essentially. And it's going to be based on a different platform than Splunk Answers is, as far as I know. So we may be able to customize some area of it for contribution, but it isn't going to be like a configuration management system. So that could be an in-between option. We can talk about that.
Answers is a great thing because it's a little more permanent than the Slack channels.
And there's you can vote on these things and comment, I expect, provide feedback on what works and what doesn't work in your environment. Steve Litres, who's here as well, and I are going to be working more closely on this answers type platform. We haven't, is it going to be called Cribl Clues? I have no idea. Does it have to alliterate? Maybe, but we might be able to accommodate something like this. We'll have to see what is available.
Yeah, as mentioned, something persistent might be interesting. I'm happy to share it via GitHub, but how do you get an inventory of the existing functions? That's something I'm wondering about.
Yeah, it would be a really useful list.
So this is Steve Litres, guys. Oops, sorry. I think for now, the Cribl content, GitHub is a good place to share this stuff via pull request. I'm one of the admins on that. There are a few others. It doesn't solve the curation problem. I think I don't remember who brought it up, but the curation issue, I think it was Brian. The curation issue is something we need to figure out going forward. But in the meantime, if you want to share that stuff, if you want to contact me, I can help you get set up with the contact or with the Cribl content repo, and then it's really just a pull request at this point.
Oh, it's a starting point for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't seem like they're kind of two similar but separate things. One is sharing the code, one is answers type thing, or really Stack Overflow. But and that's always what I wonder, and maybe I would be happy to hear the reasons. Why not just officially say Stack Overflow is it and have a separate system for it?
Why would we want to use Stack Overflow?
What's
the advantage of Stack Overflow over them just doing their own site version of Splunk Answers?
Stack Overflow has a lot of that's one of the starting points of what a lot of those sites came from, and they have their own, updates, right? They talk about community and they think about it in terms of karma, or I actually forget what they call it now. There must be reasons why not just use that.
I think when we started looking at tools, and we're by no means kind of set on the platform going forward at this point, but when we looked at it, we were looking more at the idea of we wanted something that could be our own, that we could curate directly. Stack Overflow offers a private product. We took a brief look at that. We took a look at a couple other things. As Rachel mentioned, this is still kind of in the works at this point. So feedback from this is fantastic at this point. Man, I can always shut a room up, can't I?
I wanted to say thanks to Rich for sharing the example, because I always love working from examples, real examples versus reading documentation if I can.
I'd also say I love the fact that it's a simple example. That makes it so much easier to kind of learn it and think through going forward.
Yes, thank you for stepping up.
We were talking about putting that into a blog there too. That might be an interesting option, but I like the way of building on little bits and pieces. You start as simple as possible, and then you just keep pegging in new things and highlighting the bit you had to add to make that part happen, because it really helps people who don't do a lot of programming, or like me. Gosh, I had tons of assembler and C, and C++ was barely around when I was, a fledgling. So it's like, my experience is out of date. Nowadays, it's just gluing together all these libraries on the web. Oh, don't know how to make them work. So yeah, I really like that kind of format. So, and I think a lot of people do.
Well, now we know who to get for CribbleCon 1.
Someday, yes, there will be CribbleConf for sure. Oh, the party we will have.
Let's make sure. Like I said, let's make sure it's in a small enough place that you won't get 60,000 steps in before 6 o'clock in the evening, Rachel.
Oh, you don't like taking over the Disney compound or Vegas?
For the first couple, anyway.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I'm sure that'll come, and with it will come swag, which I'm using as a clunky segue to. Rachel, you have some things to raffle off, and I will turn off the recording because we don't need that at this point.
What? Okay.
The content happened.
A couple things we do. I have